Now I discovered the best, strongest, fastest Ball Lightning build for the Sorcerer in Season 2. With this build, you can easily clear multiple Tier 100 Nightmare dungeons and destroy Uber Lilith. This build is utilizing the new unique ring, the Tarasha's ring, to basically quadruple our damage. And I highly recommend to watch this video from the very beginning to the end to see how everything synergizes. And check out the tips because it may answer majority of your questions. You'll see if you just try this build out, you'll drastically increase your damage, defense, and survivability. So let's check this out. Okay, so first I'm going to show you clearing this dungeon. And as you can see, I'm doing a tier 100 nightmare dungeon. I have so much defense and survivability that I won't get one-shotted by any enemies. This build is so strong that it'll melt huge groups of enemies and any bosses. Now, because of the new Tarasha's unique ring, we are going to sacrifice a legendary aspect from our ring. So the choice is either the prodigy aspect or the recharging aspect. Now, I've done hours of testings with both of these legendary aspects paired with the Tarasha's ring. And I discovered that the prodigy aspect is a lot better for mana regeneration. The reason why is first, you're using all cooldown skills except for Ball Lightning. So whenever you use a skill, you will regain mana. And second is that we are building a lot of cooldown reduction and ways to even further reduce our cooldowns. So it is very easy to spam our skills, allowing us to easily regenerate mana. Now, to get cold damage for the Tarasha's unique ring, I will be using Ice Blades as an enchantment to summon them. And to get poison damage, I'll be using the Vampiric Power Infection. And you'll need some lucky hit chance in order to form crackling energy and to spread vulnerable to enemies from your vampiric powers. Now, this build is really gear dependent if you want to easily clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons, but I'll go over some tips and skills to change if you're lacking in some stats, and I'll go over everything in more details in their dedicated sections. Okay, so next let's check out the skills. Now, of course, our main damage dealing skill is Ball Lightning. The next skill I'm using is Lightning Spear, and this skill is really good for survivability because this skill will stun all the enemies in the area. The next skill I'm using is an ultimate skill, Unstable Currents. And with the current stats and gear I'm using, you should have this ultimate skill active almost all the time. The next two skills are barrier skills, so Flame Shield and Ice Armor. And these barrier skills are really good for defense and survivability. And the last skill I'm using is Teleport, and this is just the fastest and best movement skill in the game. Okay, so next for the enchantments. Now, the first enchantment I'm using is the Firebolt enchantment, and this will apply burning damage to our skills, which will greatly multiply our damage with the current gear and Paragon Board I'm using. The next enchantment I'm using is the Ice Blades enchantment, and this will allow you to spawn Ice Blades when you use your cooldown skills. And since all of our skills are cooldown skills except for Ball Lightning, we will have multiple Ice Blades everywhere. And Ice Blades will do cold damage, will chill the enemies, and also apply vulnerable to the enemies as well. So this enchantment is really good for this build. Now, because we are not using the recharging aspect on our ring, you don't need to take the Chain Lightning enchantment. Okay, so next for the Vampiric Powers. And the Vampiric Powers are really important for this build in order to maximize our damage and to apply vulnerable to your enemies. And this is ideally the best Vampiric Power setup for this build. So the first Vampiric Power I'm using is Prey on the Weak. And this will greatly increase your damage to vulnerable enemies. But most importantly, enemies will be vulnerable while affected by a Vampiric Curse from your other Vampiric Powers. So that being said, the next Vampiric Power I'm using is a Cursed Touch. And this states Lucky Hit, up to 44% chance to inflict Vampiric Curse on enemies. Afflicted enemies have a 15% chance to spread it to other enemies. So this is the reason why you want to build some lucky hit chance, so you can spread Vampiric Curse. And because of Prey on the Weak, spreading Vampiric Curse will also make enemies vulnerable. The next Vampiric Power I took is Ravenous, and this will greatly increase your attack speed when you lucky hit. The next Vampiric Power I'm using is Domination, and this will greatly increase your damage to stunned or frozen enemies. And the last Vampiric Power I'm using is Infection, and this will apply poison damage to your enemies, which paired with the Tarasha's unique ring, you will multiply your damage. Now, I do want to mention that there are some Vampiric Powers that you can change around depending on your situation and if you're lacking in some stats. But I'll go over which Vampiric Powers to change around when going over the tips on how to easily clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons. Okay, so next for the skill tree. Now, I do want to mention with my current gear and stats, this skill tree layout will easily clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons and destroy Uber Lilith. But if you are missing some stats like damage, defense, or survivability, then definitely check out the tips section where I show which skill points to change around to cover the missing stats. So starting with the basic skills, I put 2 points into Firebolt, and this is for the Firebolt enchantment. Next, for the core skills, I put 1 point into Devastation and 3 points into Elemental Dominance, and this will increase our damage to our core and mastery skills. Next, for the defensive skills, skills. I put 1 point into Flame Shield, a point into Enhanced Flame Shield, and a point into Mystical Flame Shield. And this barrier skill will make you invincible. Next, I put 1 point into Teleport, a point into Enhanced Teleport, and a point into Shimmering Teleport. And this is the best and fastest movement skill in the game. Next, I put 1 point into Ice Armor, and a point into Enhanced Ice Armor. And this barrier skill is really good for defense and survivability. Next, I put 1 point into Elemental Entombment, and this will give you a chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills. And then I put 3 points into Glass Cannon, and this will greatly increase our damage, but in return will take more damage. And next, for the Conjuration skills, I put 1 point into Ice Blades, a point into Enhanced Ice Blades, and a point into Summon Ice Blades. And this skill is used for the Ice Blades enchantment slot. So because all of our skills are cooldown skills, we should have multiple Ice Blades summoned at once. And the Ice Blades will do cool damage, chill the enemies, apply vulnerable, and has a chance to reduce your cooldowns. So the Ice Blade enchantment is really good for this build. Next, I put 1 point into Lightning Spear, a point into Enhanced Lightning Spear, and a point into Invoke Lightning Spear. And because of our gear and stats, we should be building a lot of cooldown reduction, so you should be able to spam Lightning Spears. And using Lightning Spears is really good for survivability because you'll stun all the enemies in the area. And next, I put 3 points into Conjuration Mastery. So because we're using Ice Blades and Lightning Spears, we're gonna have a lot of Conjuration skills active, so this will greatly increase our damage. Next, I put 3 points into Precision Magic. And I do want to mention that Lucky Hit Chance is really important for this build. With Lucky Hit Chance, we'll be able to form a lot of crackling energy, which will regain you mana, and having high Lucky Hit Chance will allow you to apply vulnerable to your enemies paired along with your Vampiric Powers. Next, I put 1 point into Align the Elements, a point into Mana Shield, and a point into Protection. And these skills are really good for defense and survivability. Next, for the Mastery skills, I put 5 points into Ball Lightning, a point into Enhanced Ball Lightning, and a point into Wizard's Ball Lightning. And Ball Lightning is our main damage dealing skill. Next, I put 1 point into Inner Flames and 3 points into Devouring Blaze, and this will greatly increase our critical strike damage against burning enemies. Next, I put 3 points into Static Discharge. So the reason we need some Lucky Hit Chance is because of this skill, Static Discharge, because it will allow our shock skills to form crackling energy. So because we're not using the Chain Lightning enchantment and using the Ice Blades enchantment, you will need to rely on Static Discharge to form crackling energy. And because we have really high cooldown reduction and skills that greatly reduce our cooldowns, you'll be able to cast Lightning Spears everywhere and have your ultimate skill Unstable Currents active almost all the time. So because of Static Discharge and building some Lucky Hit Chance, you will have crackling energy everywhere. And then I put 3 points into Invigorating Conduit, and this skill is really important to regain your mana. Next, for the ultimate skill, I put 1 point into Unstable Currents, a point into Prime Unstable Currents, and a point into Supreme Unstable Currents. And this ultimate skill will destroy huge groups of enemies and bosses. And because of our gear and stats, we should have this ultimate skill active almost all the time. Next, I put 1 point into Coursing Currents and 3 points into Conduction, and this will greatly increase your movement speed when you critically strike with your shock skill. And last, for the key passive. Now, the key passive you can switch around depending on your situation, but with this current setup, you want to take Overflowing Energy. The reason why is you want to reduce your cooldowns as fast as possible so you can spam your skills. And the more skills you spam, the more Ice Blades you form. So with this current setup, Overflowing Energy will be the best key passive overall. But if you're lacking in defense and survivability, you can take Vire's Mastery. Or if you're lacking in damage, you can take Esu's Ferocity. But I'll go over the different key passives when going over the tips for either fighting Uber Lilith or tips on how to easily clear tier 100 Nightmare dungeons. Okay, so next for the gear. Now, I do want to mention that this build is very gear dependent, but I'll show you other unique gears that you can use, but eventually you want to switch them out for better gear. And I'm just going to quickly go over the best stats and legendary aspects you're looking for each piece of gear. But I'll have a D4 build planner in the description below with the exact stats and legendary aspects you're looking for. So starting with the helmet, you're looking for total armor, cooldown reduction, and poison resistance. And the legendary aspect I have is that you take 25% less damage from crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. Now, the reason you want one stat that's poison resistance is that so you can cap out your poison resistance. Next, for the chest piece, you're looking for armor stats and 3 damage reduction stats. And the legendary aspect I have is that casting ice armor makes you unstoppable and grants 30% increased armor for 3.6 seconds. And having high armor is really important to easily clear high level nightmare dungeons because you'll never get one-shotted by any enemies. Next, for the gloves, you're looking for attack speed, lucky hit chance, critical strike chance, and the stat lucky hit up to a 5% chance to restore, 19.5% primary resource. And the legendary aspect I have is that Ball Lightning orbits around you and deals 25% increased damage. Next, for the pants, you're looking for ranks to Ball Lightning, total armor, and 2 damage reduction stats. And the legendary aspect I have is that you gain 1% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 60%. And this legendary aspect is one of the best defensive legendary aspects in the game. Next, for the boots, I'm using the Flicker Step unique boots. Now, these boots boots are required for this build to work because the unique aspect states that each enemy you evade through reduces your active ultimate's cooldown by 3.6 seconds up to 10 seconds. And with these unique boots, you will have your ultimate skill active almost all the time. And with these unique boots, you're looking for high movement speed and high damage reduction stats. Next, for the weapon, you're looking for a one-handed wand, so you can get the base stats, lucky hit chance, and the stats you're looking for is intelligence, and 3 high roll damage stats. And the legendary aspect I have is that you deal 29% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. Now for the offhand, you're looking for lucky hit chance, mana cost reduction, resource regeneration, and cooldown reduction. And the legendary aspect I have is that you deal 24% increased damage while you have a barrier active. Now for the amulet, you're looking for movement speed, cooldown reduction, and mana cost reduction. And the legendary aspect I have is that you deal 53% increased damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. Next, for the ring, you're looking for critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, maximum mana, and resource regeneration. And the legendary aspect is that using a cooldown resource 15 mana. And for the second ring, I'm using the Tarasha's unique ring. And this ring is required for this build to greatly multiply your damage. And the unique aspect is that for each type of elemental damage you deal, gain 13.5% increased damage for 4 seconds. Okay, so that's pretty much the best gear and stats you're looking for this build. Now here are some additional unique gears that you can use, but you do want to eventually switch them out for better gear. So first, the Godslayer crown. Now this unique helm is really good for damage, so for destroying bosses it will be better to use this helmet. But if you want to easily clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons, you do want to get a helmet like this with portal armor and cooldown reduction stats. Now the next unique chest piece you can use is Soulbrand, and this unique chest piece is good for defense and survivability. But getting a legendary chest piece with portal armor and 3 damage reduction stats is actually a lot better for survivability. So eventually you do want to switch this unique chest piece out for a better chest piece like this. The next unique chest piece you can use is the Raiment of the Infinite, but this unique chest piece is better for damage, so it's better to use this for destroying bosses. And the same thing with these unique pants, the Tybalt's Will. If you're lacking in damage, these would be better pants, but getting ranks to Ball Lightning, portal armor, and 2 damage reduction stats, and getting another defensive legendary aspect, you can easily survive through any tier 100 nightmare dungeons. But I'll go over the unique gears when going over tips to easily clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons or to destroy Uber Lilith. Okay, so next for the Paragon Board. Now I do want to mention that with this Paragon Board, I did take 8 glyphs to maximize our damage and our survivability. Now because this build has a lot of damage, I did focus a little more on defense and survivability with this Paragon Board, so you can easily clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons. But I'm just going to quickly go over this Paragon Board and the glyphs, and I'll have a D4 build planner in the description below with the full Paragon Board layout. Okay, so starting with the starter board, I did take the Exploit glyph, and this will greatly increase your damage to vulnerable enemies. The second Paragon Board I took is Burning Instinct, and the glyph I took is Destruction, and this will greatly increase your critical strike damage. And make sure you take these magic nodes and this rare node Safeguard, and also these magic nodes and this rare node Smoldering Embers to greatly increase your defense and survivability. Then I headed this way, and the next Paragon Board I took is Enchantment Master, and the glyph I took is Tactician, and this will greatly increase your damage after casting a defensive skill. Then I headed down this way, and the next Paragon Board I took is Ceaseless Conduit, and the glyph I took is Elementalist, and this will greatly increase your damage when you deal fire, cold, or lightning damage. Then I headed this way, and the next Paragon Board I took is Frigid Fate, and the glyph I chose is Charge, and this will greatly increase your damage after picking up Crackling Energy. I also took the legendary node Frigid Fate, and even though we're not building cold damage, just from our stats we're getting a 15% damage multiplier, and I highly recommend to take these magic nodes and this rare node Guarded for increased damage reduction. And for the Frigid Fate Paragon Board, I did split it into 2 directions, so first heading up, I took the Searing Heat Paragon Board, and the glyph I took is Territorial, and this glyph is really good for defense and survivability because you will gain 15% damage reduction against close enemies. Then I headed this way, and the next Paragon Board I took is Elemental Summoner, and the glyph I took is Adept, and this will increase the area effect of your mastery skill. Then heading back to the Frigid Fate Paragon Board, and then going this way. And the last Paragon Board I took is Static Surge, and the glyph I took is Flame Feeder, and this will greatly increase your damage to burning enemies. Okay, so that's pretty much the best Paragon Board layout for this build. But one quick change that you can do if you are lacking in defense and survivability is you can change one of your damage glyphs into this glyph, Reinforced, because with this glyph you will gain 15% damage reduction while you have an active barrier. So if you're having trouble surviving tier 100 nightmare dungeons, it may be best to switch one of your offensive glyphs to this glyph. Oh, and I do want to mention that for the glyph radius, if you do want it increased, your glyph level has to be level 15 or higher, and make sure you check the requirements on your glyphs so you get the additional bonuses. And like I mentioned before, D4, I will have a D4 build planner in the description below with the full Paragon board layout if you want to check that out. Okay, so next, a couple tips to easily destroy Uber Lilith. So first, you want to focus more on damage than defense, so you can skip all her one-shot mechanics. Now, if you're lacking in damage, the first thing you can do is drink an attack speed elixir, the Hardy Assault Elixir, which will increase your attack speed by 20%, and you can easily just craft this potion. And this alone should greatly increase your damage. And the next tip is that if you're still lacking in damage, then you can equip the unique gears that will greatly increase your damage. So the Godslayer Crown, the Raiment of the Infinite, and the Tybalt's Will. So now equipping these unique gears, you just greatly increase your damage. But in return, you are lacking in armor and survivability. So you will get one-shotted if you're doing tier 100 nightmare dungeons. And one last tip to greatly increase your damage is that you can change your key passive. So instead of using overflowing energy, you can use Essu's Ferocity. But you have to change one of your legendary aspects to another legendary aspect, the aspect of Ancient Flame. And this will greatly increase your attack speed when you critically strike and hit a boss or kill an enemy. Okay, so with these tips, you should be able to easily increase your damage drastically, and as a result, you should easily destroy Uber Lilith. Okay, so now tips on how to easily clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons. So when it comes to tier 100 nightmare dungeons, you want to focus a little more on defense and survivability compared to offense. So the first tip is that if you're lacking armor, drink an armor potion. Next, you want to equip gear that has total armor and damage reduction stats. And if you can't find a good legendary chest piece, you can use the Soul Brand unique chest piece for now. But eventually you want to switch out to a chest piece with total armor and damage reduction stats. Another tip is that you want to utilize your Flicker Step unique boots, so you can have your ultimate skill active almost all the time. So in the dungeons, make sure you evade through the enemies so you can quickly reduce your cooldown on your ultimate skill. Another tip is don't use the Oculus wand. Just be aware that this is a meme unique gear. First of all, you'll need a perfect roll Oculus with an item power of 925 to even compete with a legendary wand that you can easily find. Especially if you're farming Uber bosses, you will easily find legendary weapons at item level 925. Second is the damage is far lower compared to a legendary wand with a offensive legendary aspect. Now there are plenty more reasons why the Oculus is not good for this build, but I don't want to waste your time listing them all. Now don't get me wrong, you can still clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons and defeat Uber Lilith with the Oculus, but just be aware it's because the Ball Lightning build in general is really strong. So if you just want to be more efficient, it's best not to use the Oculus wand. And the next tip is that there's one Vampiric Power that you can change for more survivability. Now first, I would recommend to remove the Vampiric Power Infection. Now even though we're losing our poison damage, so we won't get the multiplier damage increase from the Tarasha's unique ring, the other Vampiric Power we're using is more important. Now you may think to remove Domination, but a 24% damage multiplier increase is a lot higher than what the Tarasha's damage increase will be. So you want to take off Infection and change it up to Resilience. And with this Vampiric Power, you will gain damage reduction for each life you are missing. So this Vampiric Power is really good for defense and survivability. And the last thing you can do is change up a couple points on your skill tree. So first, you want to remove all the points out of Glass Cannon, because even though this increases your damage, you'll take more damage. So now we'll have 3 skill points. You want to put 2 points into Protection to max it out, and 1 point into Mana Shield. And with these changes, you should greatly increase your defense and survivability. And one other thing you can do is take off Overflowing Energy for Virus Mastery, so you can get damage reduction from close enemies. So of course, with all these changes, you are sacrificing damage for defense and survivability. Now the thing to easily clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons is that you don't want to be one-shotted, because if you see yourself take damage, you can react by using your skills. But if you get one-shotted, and there are a lot of times where you can get one-shotted off screen, you will have a tougher time clearing tier 100 nightmare dungeons. Okay, so thanks for checking out the best, strongest, fastest Ball Lightning build for the Sorcerer in Season 2. With this build, you should easily clear tier 100 nightmare dungeons and destroy Uber Lilith. Now, this build is gear dependent, so if you're still leveling and if mana is an issue, it may be better to not use the Tarasha's unique ring and use rings with the recharging aspect and the prodigy aspect, so you can easily regain mana very quickly. And if you have issues finding unique gear and you want a Ball Lightning build, you can definitely check out this video here. Hope this helps, and more Diablo 4 videos to come, so stay tuned. And of course,